Neuroscience and cognitive science are not necessarily about reality. They're about perception, the way we see. Let's take the color green. If green exists against a green backdrop, can we see it? Perhaps vision requires context, contrast. Imagine green, for instance, as a width of pipe. If my sight line is along the pipe itself is invisible to me. I only perceive the pipe if I'm narrower or wider than it. When I'm narrower, I'm seeing it from the inside. When I'm wider, I'm seeing it from the outside. Perhaps in order to see green, I have to be a little different from it. If this flat 2D plane is green, I have to be a little denser down here, or a little wider up here. But this then raises new questions. If I'm denser than green or wider than green, have I lost my ability to see green as it really is? Perhaps when blue looks at green, it sees yellow. And when yellow looks at green, it sees blue. The analogy I used yesterday was, ice thinks water has speed. Vapor thinks water has density. But water knows water has neither. So in talking about holographic universe, I suggested we designate this flat 2D plane as light. This is light as itself, or light qua light. When I'm observing this from down here, from denser than light, will it look like sun to me? When I'm observing this from up here, from wider than light, will it look like moon to me? But in truth, both sun and moon are in the eye of the beholder. They're a function of the relative state of the observer. In sun and moon, I'm observing this same plane of light, not head on, but from below or above it. Now let's extend this principle. Let's say this 2D plane is pH 7. Perhaps from down here, this looks like potassium to me. And from up here, this looks like sodium to me. But in fact, it's neither. It's neutral. It's not acidic and it's not alkaline. In other words, down here, this looks too alkaline to me because I'm too acidic. And up here, this looks too acidic to me because I'm too alkaline. Down here, I'm ice looking at water and seeing vapor. Up here, I'm vapor looking at water and seeing ice. But really, it's just water. It's just water all the while. I use acidity and alkalinity to define what water is for myself, to define this plane. That's the heart of what I'm trying to say today, so I'm going to say it again. I use my perception of acidity and of alkalinity to define what water is. When I have a value for acid and a value for alkaline, I can derive pH 7. When I have a value for ice and a value for vapor, I can derive water. When I have a value for matter and a value for energy, I can derive light. But the values I'm using in my derivatives equation might be only locally correct only within my own microenvironment. For instance, what if I eat only meat? I eat a diet of amino acids. Then my range doesn't go all the way up here necessarily. Maybe it goes only from here to here. So for me, this plane is actually pH 7. If I'm working only from here to here, this pH 7 is locally correct. Or what if I eat only vegetables, a diet that's very low in sodium and high in potassium? Then my range doesn't go all the way down here necessarily. Maybe it goes only from here to here. So for me, this plane is actually pH 7. If I'm working only from here to here, this pH 7 is locally correct. In both of these instances, I'm technically accurate. I'm right, but I'm also wrong. I'm right, but only in a relative sense. But maybe a relative sense is all that matters. My brain is saying, look, I've got blue and I've got yellow, so I made green. I don't have a problem with that. If you've got a problem with that, that's your problem. This isn't about the virtues of a carnivore diet or a vegetarian diet. This is about asking whether the perception of pH could be relative. If my brain is a tiny bit too acidic or a tiny bit too alkaline, will I have lost the ability to perceive pH 7 accurately? And if so, then what happens? If I keep pH 7 is life critical. If I keep my pH too acidic, I can compensate for this with a slower metabolism. If I keep my pH too alkaline, I can compensate for this with a faster metabolism, with generating more acid via metabolism. In other words, perhaps time, the core metabolic rate, and light, the pH toggle. The larger point I'm trying to make is this. Perhaps time is the missing variable in our analysis of human health, and my perception of time may be inherently flawed. What will I have for dinner? Could be a dozen different things. But what did I have for breakfast? Only one thing. Behind me, time appears to narrow. In front of me, time appears to widen. But is this cone shape an illusion? What if this is not narrower than I am? What if this is not wider? What if this, and this are all the same width? Perhaps looking backward in time, we see less than what was. And looking forward in time, we see more than what will be. Time is an arrow, an even width of pipe, but we don't see it as an arrow. We see it as a cone. But this whole shape may be wrong. This whole shape may be incorrect. This isn't light. This is time. Light as I perceive it. Light in the eye of an observer. When I view time as a cone instead of as an even width of pipe, I limit myself. Eventually, as the cone widens, it widens all the way and becomes flat. Then I'm metabolically trapped. In a holographic universe, perhaps light as light is the natural state, not light as time. I want to be the same width as light. I want to be green on green, not narrower than light down here and not wider than light up here. This isn't true green. This is blue. And now I've made the background yellow. And this isn't true green either. This is yellow. And now I've made the background blue. My brain has to accurately locate me in time. Because this is too narrow down here, if my brain locates me down here, I'm going to feel, my pineal gland is going to feel the exploding force. Once I experience time as the exploding force, as manganese, I'm going to hoard the opposite of manganese. I'm going to hoard magnetism, iron. But the more I make myself iron, the more I become denser than light, the more I will feel time as exploding. I'm not here. I'm moving away from center. My arrow is pointing downward. Could this be part of what we see in Parkinson's disease? My brain wants to accurately locate me in time because this is too wide up here. If my brain locates me up here, my pineal gland will feel the condensing force. Once I experience time as condensing, as magnetism, as iron, I will hoard the opposite of iron, manganese. But the more I make myself manganese, the more I become wider than light, the more I will feel time as condensing. I'm not here. I'm moving away from center. My arrow is pointing upward. Could this be part of what we see in Lou Gehrig's disease? Once I misunderstand time, I have to fix two things at once: the original problem and what my body is doing to compensate. So as I mentioned in part 1, let's say the tension in my blinds is too high. They keep snapping back up whenever I pull them down, so I hang a weight on them. Now, if I want to remove the weight, I have to also lower the tension. I have to do two things at once: decrease dopamine and slow down methylation. Or I have to decrease serotonin and speed up methylation. If time is too fast, light has to be too slow. If time is too slow, light has to be too fast. In other words, here at light, at pH 7, the proton gradient is balanced and there's easy homeostasis. The inside isn't denser than the outside, and the outside isn't denser than the inside. But down here, where time narrows, the proton gradient, the density, is higher on the inside. And up here, where time widens, the proton gradient is higher on the outside. But that's unstable. So what happens? The proton gradient may be being balanced by forces. Down here, in Parkinson's, if you want to decrease the protons on the inside, you have to simultaneously decrease the condensing force on the outside. Up here, in ALS, if you want to decrease the protons on the outside, you have to decrease the exploding force on the inside. Oxalate is a crystal found in plants capable of photosynthesis. When I got sick, I discovered that I couldn't handle a lot of dietary oxalate, foods like spinach and rhubarb. But some people can eat oxalate all day, every day. What was the difference between them and me? Perhaps on the inside I can have high density oxalate crystal, a high proton gradient, so long as I have high pressure on the outside. I can handle oxalate crystal if I'm down here, but not if I'm up here. As I age, it becomes harder and harder for me to dip below or rise above this plane. Why? Because I'm using so much information in here. This area is so full of peaks and troughs that I don't have any bandwidth left to truly go up and down. For instance, my blood, my estrogen. I want to swing below this plane to increase my estrogen, to increase my vitamin K, and to thicken my blood. And then I want to swing up here to drop my estrogen and to shed my uterine lining. But I can't. For a while, for about 50 years, I can dip and surge and dip and surge. But once I can see the pit and the mouth of this cone, time is essentially complete. The cone has widened all the way and is flat again. If I make my blood thicker than this or thinner than this, I'll be out of range on both ends. Once I'm 50 years wide, this cone is fully defined and I hit a paradoxical wall. To me, it feels as if all the way up here, my blood gets so thin that it starts to get thick again. And all the way down here, my blood gets so thick that it starts to get thin again. Down here, my blood is thick, but it's under so much pressure that the pressure returns it to the proper consistency. And up here, my blood is thin, but it's under so little pressure that the net viscosity is correct. The inherent character of my blood is being compensated for by the degree of pressure it's under. It's not just about the thing, it's about the context, the environment. And this is precisely what I'm trying to say about our perception of light. When we see light, what we call light, are we seeing something that is in fact denser than light, but is under so much pressure that it presents to our eyes as light? Or are we seeing something that is in fact more diffuse than light, but it's under so little pressure that it presents as light? Or are we seeing light as light? How can we tell? Water looks like water, sure, but would ice under incredibly high pressure also look like water? And would vapor under incredibly low pressure also look like water? So you see, it's not necessarily a one-step image, a flat image, what we see. We have to consider the act, the mechanics of rendering. Why am I talking about water anyway? Because in a way, this model treats the cosmos, the body, as a hydraulic system. Only instead of water, it's light. If we inject oxalate crystal into breast tissue, we induce cancer. Why? Because the equation for light has to balance. If we make the proton gradient too high on the inside, that's an explosion. If we make the proton gradient too high on the outside, that's an implosion. Instead, as we force the internal density to go up, if we also force the external pressure to go up, we still have light. We still have light, but now we're down here. So let's say we do it again. We increase the internal density and increase the external pressure. And we increase the internal density and increase the external pressure. With cancer, we are essentially moving backward in time. We are imploding. Once I create a past that is denser than the present, I create a future that is wider than the present. Once I create red and blue superimposed, I create red and blue split. Red and blue as two separate arrows of time. But for me, for one observer, the truth is neither. The truth is red or blue. Red and blue superimposed and red and blue splitting are reciprocal illusions. These are noise. The cat is dead or it's alive. It isn't dead alive, and it isn't dead and alive. Dead alive is too narrow. Dead and alive is too wide. I have to hold within myself a knowledge of time, of day, the distance from here to here, and of night, the distance from here to here, all the while knowing that this perspective, as well as this perspective, are both illusions. These are reciprocal illusions, whereby I'm seeing the same plane, light qua light, here, the color green, from different sides. From below this plane, we see the gas giants. From above it, the rocky planets. So from down here looking up, it's Jupiter. But from up here looking down, it's Venus. From down here, it's Saturn. From up here, it's Mercury. In this holographic model, the planets are special relativity pairs. Everything is special relativity. As far back as 1960, Eugene Wigner pointed our attention to the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in describing the natural world. This unreasonableness becomes far more reasonable if we see the material world as an image, as something that's being rendered. Quantum mechanics suggests that light is both particle and wave. This model suggests that it's neither. Particle and wave are both derivatives of light. Light can be rendered as a particle or rendered as a wave. But when we see the particle, are we seeing blue on yellow? And when we see the wave, are we seeing yellow on blue? If yes, then Plato was correct, and we're seeing not the thing itself, but the degree of contrast between the thing and its environment. What if true light, light as light, is green on green? Perhaps light qua light, the pipe itself, stretches from black hole to black hole to black hole. I'll end with a quote from Harvard University's Black Hole Initiative. The black hole at the center of our galaxy, Sagittarius A star, has the largest angular size in the sky, followed by M87. M87's black hole is 1,000 times bigger, but roughly 1,000 times farther away. This is part 2 of a talk I did for a neuroscience conference. Part 1 is called, Does Light Have Speed or Does Light Have Density? Thank you so much for listening.